Hey guys, welcome to the channel. Welcome to another video. The first round of Premier League fixtures has been and gone. Another chapter of the Premier League reopens, kicks off yet again. Another season has begun, and what an incredible weekend it was of Premier League action to get the new season underway. We saw Manchester City kick off their Premier League title defence with a 3-0 victory over Premier League new boys Burnley. It wasn't a great weekend for the new boys of the Premier League as it was with Burnley, like I say, losing to Man City. Sheffield United lost to Crystal Palace, and Luton were thumped away from home against Brighton, of course. Elsewhere, there were wins for Arsenal, who got their league campaign underway. They beat Nottingham Forest. There was also wins for Newcastle, who put Aston Villa absolutely to the sword in what was a pretty surprising result for the weekend, I would say, in terms of the overall scoreline, because I was expecting a much closer game than what it turned out to be. We'll talk about that a little later as well. Otherwise, wins for Fulham, wins, like I said, for Crystal Palace. A draw between Bournemouth and West Ham played out at the Vitality Stadium. Sunday's games saw Ange Postecoglou's reign at Tottenham begin with a 2-2 draw over Brentford. Liverpool and Chelsea were battling very hard over the course of this past week in terms of certain players in the transfer window. They took their battle onto the pitch where, again, nothing could separate them for, I think, the 7th consecutive time as another draw played out between those two. And last night, of course, Manchester United picked up their first win of the season, of course, and picked up their first points of the season in slightly controversial circumstances when they beat Wolves by a goal to nil. We're going to get into all of these games, talking about them, talking about where each team goes from here over the course of the next week or so. But before we go any further, I would like to remind you all to please like the video and also subscribe if you're new. Both things always and probably greatly appreciated. Also, do get involved in the chat throughout this video. Do talk to me about what you saw or how you feel or anything along those lines. Your thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, in regards to anything that you saw across this weekend's football. That is really, really annoying me because I couldn't find my phone. And it was going off. Found me now. It's all good. Right. Get into this. Awkward. Where to begin? Let's begin with last night. Let's begin with the freshest game in our minds. Last night, Manchester United against Wolves. It finished 1-0 to Manchester United. They have Raphael Varane to thank for that one. I think it was Aaron Wan-Bissaka's chipped ball over the top of a onrushing Jose Sarr that helped the ball fall to Varane, who headed home and secured all 3 points for Manchester United. Look, at the end of the day, a win's a win. You take it however it is, but United were not great. United were pretty poor, and they were very fortunate. I'm not saying that because I'm a rival. I'm not saying that to try and be banterous or funny or whatever it may be. Like, anyone will tell you watching that game, I think even most Man United fans will probably tell you they got away with one last night. United were not great. United couldn't really move the ball. They couldn't really move the ball quick enough. They couldn't really get any moments of quality to really shine through on the night. And the one moment that they did, they took. The one moment of quality, moving the ball through the lines and getting space for Wan-Bissaka to obviously set up Varane, was the one moment of quality that they needed, and they took it. I think coming into the game, everyone was expecting United to win. Everyone was expecting Wolves to be in complete chaos, obviously having sacked their manager and brought in Gary O'Neill a few days before the season even began. I think everyone was expecting Wolves to arrive with a bit of chaos. They weren't expecting them to be as good as what they were. But Wolves were the more dangerous side. Wolves played the better football. Wolves were pretty strong and resolute for the most part. It was just that one moment that Man United took that Wolves didn't, because otherwise Wolves had the better chances. And the striker that Wolves had up front in Cunha, if he had a bit more composure and a bit more concentration when in front of goal, he could have had a hat trick last night. He had a fair few chances that were either denied by just going wide or were denied by the new United goalkeeper Andre Onana. He could have had a hat trick last night. He was electric, and he was a constant thorn in that Manchester United defence. It said to me that there was obviously a lot for United still to work on, a lot for United still to do. But just like we saw for large parts of last season, United didn't play well, but still managed to get the win. And overall, you've got to say that that's a good trait and a good quality to have right now. If they can obviously work on their performance level, if they can work on their unity as a team and their togetherness and all of that good stuff, that makes a good team and a good solid unit, then the performances will soon match the results potentially. Like I say, United weren't great on the night. I didn't think they were great in parts of last season as well, but they managed to get the win in those games last season, and they've continued immediately right off the bat this season. The controversy came right at the end of the game where a cross came in and Andre Onana rushes out. He doesn't get the ball, and he kind of clatters into, I don't remember which Wolves player it was, but he clatters into a Wolves player, doesn't get anywhere near the ball, and the referee and the VAR said, that's fine, no penalty, play on. A couple minutes later, the referee blows his full-time whistle. Looking back on it, definitely was a stonewall penalty. I don't understand how the referee and VAR can claim it wasn't. After the game, allegedly, Gary O'Neill said that the referees came up to him afterwards and said, having reviewed it, it was a penalty. And they apologised. And as we all know, an apology from the Premier League, an apology from referees is as good as a point, right? Wrong. Wolves were hard done by. Wolves were very unlucky not to get something from the game in terms of their overall performance and the way that obviously a lot of people, like I say, were expecting them to simply be United's whipping boys for the night. That wasn't to be the case. Wolves turned up. They played very well. They played with a high intensity, and they were very, very good throughout the entire game. And they were very unfortunate to come away with nothing. Even more unfortunate that they didn't get the penalty right at the end, because that was a stonewall penalty in my opinion. And a lot of people's opinions it was as well. And just for VAR as well, just to not even review it, not even tell the referee to review it. I mean, what did they just want to get home? Was it at the end of the game? They'd already added on 7 minutes. Did they just want to go, you know what, I can't bother to review it. Let's just go home and we'll offer them an apology. I don't get it. I personally do not get why that happened. I don't get it. I don't get why the VAR didn't simply say to the referee, you might want to go and check that. You may have made a mistake. It was clear and obvious, because let's face it, if a player clatters into another player when the ball is up in the air and he's late, that's a foul. If an outfield player in the middle of the pitch clatters into another player the way that Onana did on the defender, on the striker, that is a foul all day long. The referee's blowing that up, and he's giving a free kick to obviously the kind of victim's team in that. That's what I don't understand. Just because it was Onana, allegedly, the referee thought, or just because it was the goalkeeper in that situation, the referee thought, nah, that's fine. That's fine. And in a weekend in which obviously some softer penalties were given, it baffled me, that one. It really did baffle me, and I don't understand it. I'm not going to go down the route of going, oh, it's Manchester United. I can't even say it. I'm not going to go down the route of saying, oh, referees are back in Manchester United's pocket. I'm not going to go down that route. I'm just going to say that it was controversial. It was bitterly disappointing to see a poor decision not be given correctly, and overall unfortunate on Wolves, because they did play well and they did deserve at least something from that game. But there are a lot of positives to take from Wolves, and there are a lot of things to look at from Wolves' point of view and be optimistic about for a season that obviously began even before a ball was kicked, seemingly in a bit of chaos, with obviously the manager leaving and the new manager coming in, of course, in Gary O'Neill. But like I say, from Wolves' point of view, a lot to look at and a lot to be positive about. From Manchester United's point of view, they got away with one. It was a smash and grab. It was a poor performance. It was not great. But the positives are it's 3 points, it's a win, it's a clean sheet right off the bat for Andre Onana. So as disappointed as I am that obviously Wolves didn't get a penalty, I'm slightly happy because Onana's in my fantasy team. So, that was kind of fortunate in some ways. But again, I'm a little bit torn. But no. In all seriousness, Wolves deserve something. United got away with one. Much work to be done going forward. But, first game of the season, you just want to get that win. And that's exactly what Manchester United did, especially after watching over the weekend the likes of Arsenal, Man City, Newcastle, obviously all pick up wins in their respective games. Of course, following suit with all 3 points is exactly what Erik ten Hag would have wanted at the beginning of the game. So, fair play. United get the win. But yeah, much work to be done as far as what United are concerned. A lot to be optimistic about as what Wolves are concerned. And as far as VAR are concerned, a lot to be looked at and reviewed and worked upon for the future. So there you have it. Next up, we're going to move on to Friday night's game. The game that kicked off the new season, the game that kicked off the Premier League weekend. It was the Premier League new boys in Burnley taking on Manchester City, the defending Premier League champions, the treble winners of last season. The underlying story here was Vincent Kompany's first game in management in the Premier League as he takes on his former boss and manager in Pep Guardiola. And I think Burnley gave a good account of themselves. I think the scoreline flattered Manchester City a little bit. I think Burnley gave a good account of themselves. If you are to simply take it at face value as obviously a 3-0 defeat to Burnley, you might think, oh, well, Burnley were terrible. Far from it. Far from it. Burnley, I thought, were pretty good in the game, and I thought at times they really gave City some food for thought in their build-up play and going forward. Again, it's a game of fine margins, and it's a game that is even more intense and a bit quicker than it is in the Championship, and close down spaces that you would find in the Championship when in comparison to the Premier League. And obviously Burnley found that out a little bit the hard way in this game. It was basically who had the better finishing. And of course, when you have an absolute goal-scoring machine and an absolute freak of nature up front for Manchester City in the form of Erling Haaland, of course, you're not really going to win that particular battle. And that's exactly what Vincent Kompany pretty much alluded to and stated in his post-match press conference. Haaland was a difference maker. That is it. That is what it was. I don't think City were amazing. I don't think City were great. But that was to be expected because City never begin this season at a high intensity or at 100%. They normally slowly shift through the gears as the season wears on. But of course, when you have Haaland, who only needs half a chance in front of goal to make something happen, that is exactly what the difference maker was. And, you know, he got them off to a flyer. He scored the opening goal of the season. Haaland was back. It wasn't long before he made it 2-0, absolutely thumping the ball into the back of the net, into that top corner. A fantastic finish on both accounts. The first one, a bit more of a snapshot. The second one, just absolutely smashed into that top corner. And then in the second half, Rodri rounded off the game with a fine goal himself to eventually prod the ball home. Simply put, again, similar to what I said about Man United, the opening game of the season, you just need to win. And that is exactly what City did. It's always difficult to go to a newly promoted club, especially away from home on the first game of the season. But City managed to overcome the occasion. And I think a lot of people were maybe watching that game and maybe rethinking about Burnley, because I thought, like I say, I thought Burnley gave a good account of themselves. I think Burnley maybe surprised a few people that were maybe expecting the same old Burnley of seasons gone by, not to be the case under Vincent Kompany right now. And yeah, I think Burnley will be fine. I think Burnley will be fine going forward. I think, like I say, I thought they played very well. It was unfortunate that obviously the red card happened right at the end, but it was to be given. It was correctly issued by VAR to a certain extent. It was a rash challenge. It was a slightly dangerous challenge. There was no malicious intent behind it. It was just a bit of panic stations at the back by the player whose name now escapes me as to who got it. But it was a bit of panic stations, and unfortunately, he went flying in. Bit rash and deserved the red card, but at the same time, yeah, I think Burnley will be fine overall. As for City, look, business as usual. Haaland's back amongst the goals. They'll shift through the gears, but opening day win, 3 goals, 2 for Haaland, a clean sheet. Perfect day all round for Pep Guardiola's side, to be honest. Chelsea, Liverpool is what we're going to come to next. Now, if you want more of a look into this game, do go back and check out my match review on the channel. I'll talk about this a bit more in detail. I'll only briefly talk about it. I don't really want to go over old ground on this. I've covered it for the past couple of days. I thought overall Chelsea were the better team. I thought Liverpool looked a little bit dangerous on the counter-attack, particularly I thought in the opening half an hour, I thought Liverpool were solid. I thought Liverpool were comfortable. I thought Liverpool set up pretty well and could have obviously gone on to maybe put the game to bed. But with only scoring the 1 goal, getting the other goal choked off for offside through Mohamed Salah, it wasn't to be, and Chelsea grew more and more into the game as the game wore on, and eventually were the better side. I thought both teams had a couple of good opportunities. I thought Chelsea created the better ones, had Nicholas Jackson in particular, had a bit more composure in front of goal. I think maybe he could have actually been the difference maker on the day. But there are good signs, and there are good signs for Chelsea in that aspect. And how Pochettino wants to play, wants to set up, and how he wants to deploy his obviously very young, very inexperienced, but very exciting looking Chelsea squad going forward. Like I say, they overloaded the wings and they isolated Liverpool's fullbacks. And it was clear and obvious to everybody watching that Liverpool were lacking a balance in midfield. I didn't think Liverpool really... It was strange because I don't think Liverpool were individually, in terms of the squad, the team they had on the pitch, I don't think they were individually terrible. I don't think they were great either, and I don't think they helped each other out, and they didn't know whether they were coming or going for the most part. But obviously Chelsea took advantage of that as the game wore on. And like I say, the wings in particular were Chelsea's main point to exploit. They overloaded and 2v1'd down their right-hand side in terms of Sterling and Reece James on Andy Robertson. And Ben Chilwell galloping forward constantly on the other side caused Trent Alexander-Arnold plenty of food for thought down that particular side. As far as what Liverpool are concerned, that it wasn't all bad news. Like the opening half an hour was very good. If they can obviously stretch that out over a longer period of time, and obviously if they can work on that opening half an hour, then maybe there is something to do with this team. But after a week in which has been so poor in terms of obviously their transfer strategy and their transfer window deteriorating over time, it just added insult to injury. The fact that they weren't able to get the win in this game. A point away at Stamford Bridge isn't a terrible result by any stretch of the imagination, regardless of what Chelsea team are there right now, and regardless of the Chelsea squad and where it currently is and everything. You know, Stamford Bridge is always a tough place to go. So I guess a point there is not the end of the world, and it's not a bad result either. But, you know, it's still frustrating that the game was there to be won at certain times throughout the entire game. And Liverpool, if they'd have been better in the final third in terms of their final ball, if they'd have been stronger defensively, you know, maybe they could have won it on another day. Maybe, just maybe. But on the flip side of that, like I say, Chelsea could have won it equally because Chelsea created some great chances. Chelsea were pretty solid throughout. I thought defensively they grew stronger. I thought in the midfield, Enzo Fernandez, no Liverpool player could get anywhere near him. I thought Conor Gallagher grew into the game as the game wore on as well. And I think up front, Sterling worked very hard. I don't think he was as influential on the ball, but I think he worked very hard in creating space for others and creating some decent moments of build-up play. Nicholas Jackson, like I say, he looks very good. He kept on getting into some dangerous areas and obviously getting into some being a thorn in the side of the Liverpool defence in terms of obviously creating opportunities and helping his teammates create opportunities for himself as well. Like I say, I think there's a lot to look at with this Chelsea side, and especially with the players that they've got coming in, and Moises Caicedo and seemingly Romeo Lavia as well. Like, with them players coming in, it's only going to make Chelsea more exciting and more intriguing going forward. So, solid result by both teams. Both teams could feel a little bit annoyed that they didn't have enough to go on and win the game. I thought Chelsea was slightly the more better side, but a point, probably slightly fair result, I guess you could say. I guess you could say based on the overall balance of play, based on the chances that were created. And I know it sounds a bit weird me saying that Chelsea was slightly the better side, but at the same time, a draw was probably a fair result, and there might be a little bit of bias towards that, but at the same time, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. Like I say, I'm taking whatever I can get this season, and especially if our transfer policy is anything to go by, you know, I'm looking for any sort of positive and any sort of way to be optimistic for the future, in all honesty. So we'll see. We'll see how these two teams play out the rest of the season and how they go forward throughout. But yes, Chelsea looking very intriguing. Liverpool, like I say, squad-wise, they look intriguing. Going forward, they look definitely exciting to watch. It's just defensively, they seem still a little bit all over the place, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. Arsenal versus Forest. Arsenal kicked off their campaign with a victory over Nottingham Forest, 2-1 on the day. Saturday's lunchtime kickoff saw Eddie Nketiah and Bukayo Saka score for Arsenal. There was some late drama when Taiwo Awoniyi, the Nottingham Forest substitute, managed to grab a goal back for Forest to set up a very intriguing finale to the game, but Arsenal managed to hold on to the win, to the 3 points, and get the win for Mikel Arteta's side. Big result for Arsenal. It was made a lot harder than it needed to be. I feel like in the first half, Arsenal were excellent. They suffocated Forest. They didn't let Forest even get out their own half. The possession was heavily in Arsenal's favour, but Forest just didn't have an outlet. Forest just don't have an out unless Awoniyi is on the pitch. They don't have an outlet because as soon as Awoniyi came on, the hold-up play was there, the target man was there, the pace was there, the counter-attack was there. It changed. Elanga and Awoniyi changed the game for Forest in that second half. And I know that Awoniyi was injured in pre-season, so I get why they wouldn't want to risk him from the start. But playing Brennan Johnson up front on his own, when all he really seems to have is pace, it didn't help. It didn't help Forest at all. What we saw when Awoniyi came on was he was difficult to handle. He was strong. He was physical. He put himself about. He was challenging. He held up play really well. I said last season, this guy is very underrated. This guy is very, very good. And it was unfortunate that his season was stop-start for the most part, because I actually think Forest could have earned a few more points in the bag had they had him fit and ready to go for big parts of last season. It was fortunate that they got him fit and ready for when they did, and obviously he was a massive part in obviously Forest managing to stay up. But you saw the difference between Brennan Johnson and him in leading the line. He was physical, he was strong, his hold-up play was good, he brought others into the game, and he was an outlet for Forest constantly when obviously trying to launch a counter-attack. And the goal that Forest scored, the pace of him starting the attack and then feeding Anthony Elanga, who then just bombed forward, just got his head down and just went forward before obviously releasing the ball back to Awoniyi, who finished very well. You saw that counter, that pace, that strength, everything that went into that counter-attack between those two players in particular is going to be a fantastic asset for Forest to have this season. And like I say, if you add Gibbs-White to that, I know he had a poor game, but if you add Gibbs-White to that mix as well, hopefully that they can get a better understanding themselves this season between the two of them, or even three of them at this stage. You've got a very dangerous front three potentially in the making there. You've potentially got a very dangerous front three. And like I say, I for one, I think Forest are going to be okay. I think they're going to be safe. I think they're going to have their home form again be very, very good, and then and then away from home they're going to have to pick up a few more points, I think, this season. But I think it certainly can be possible, assuming that Awoniyi is going to be fit. Awoniyi is going to be fit, because I think he is a massive part of this Forest side with what he offers and what he brings to the squad. Now, as far as what Arsenal are concerned, look, two very well taken goals. Obviously, it wasn't by no means perfect, and it was a bit shaky at the end. They let Forest completely back into the game when things looked a bit comfortable. Bukayo Saka scored a quality goal, absolute quality goal from Bukayo Saka to open his account for the season. And like I say, first half was perfect. And then second half, it just showed you that with a physical presence up front, Arsenal can be got at a little bit. The unfortunate thing for Arsenal was that Jurrien Timber got injured in the game and is seemingly going to be out for a good few months. So that is not good. That's not good for Arsenal or their new signing. Will they go back into the transfer market, perhaps, maybe to get some sort of replacement to take them to that point, or whether they'll reinforce that particular position remains to be seen. What the plan is for Mikel Arteta there. But like I say, a very good start for Arsenal in terms of obviously winning the game, in terms of overcoming a difficult challenge towards the end of the game in particular. And Nketiah and Saka both get off the mark in terms of their goal scoring accounts for the season. Unfortunate they couldn't get a clean sheet to go with it. But it's the first game of the season. Difficult task in Nottingham Forest. They'll be happy with the 3 points, I'm sure. So, bit to work on, but they got the 3 points. That's all that matters. They maintained pace with Man City, of course, won the previous night. And yeah, like I say, Arsenal will go from strength to strength, I'm sure. Arsenal will get better as the season goes on, I'm sure. So, yeah, a lot to be optimistic about for both clubs in certain aspects. But I think Arsenal will be up there challenging, and I think Forest will be pretty safe this season. So we'll see. We'll see how obviously it all goes. Next, Newcastle against Aston Villa ended in one of the shock results of the weekend, in my opinion, with Newcastle beating Aston Villa by 5-1, really putting Unai Emery's men to the sword, did Eddie Howe's side. Sandro Tonali got the ball rolling for Newcastle. He drew first blood and opened his goal scoring account for the season on his debut. Talk about a player that so-called doesn't want to be there, but yet he managed to get them off to a fantastic start. A well-taken goal by the Italian midfielder. It was a game for debuts, to be honest, because Aston Villa hit back moments later through Moussa Diaby, a player who also was making his debut for the Villains. He opened his goal-scoring account for the season, equalising for Unai Emery's side. But from there, Newcastle took the game by the scruff of the neck. Alexander Isak with a brace, followed by substitute Callum Wilson scoring in the second half. And then to round off the game, another debutant for Newcastle in Harvey Barnes, scoring the 5th goal, rounding off the performance, a 5-star performance by Newcastle United. Fantastic result all round. And what I've got to say is that Newcastle looked frightening. Newcastle looked devastating. And I think that's what we're going to see a lot more of this season. I think the additions of Sandro Tonali to help balance that midfield and also be a versatile and flexible midfield is a fantastic signing, and a player that I've admired from his time over in Italy. I think that's going to be a brilliant signing for Eddie Howe's side going forward, and I don't agree with any of these people that say he doesn't want to be there. Why is he trading Milan for Newcastle for? Well, clearly the Gregs, of course, or the Weatherspoons. No, of course not. Tonali, for me, a beautiful and fantastic signing. Harvey Barnes, direct, solid, Premier League proven to an extent. I think that's a good, solid signing as well. And I think all of these are going to add to Newcastle's strengths this season and make them even better. I think last season, I don't think you can play Isak and Wilson together. I think you have to alternate one or the other. I think I think where you need a bit more of a physical presence, I think you go for Wilson. I think where you need a bit more speed and a bit more of a higher work rate, I think you go for Isak. And I think it showed today. And for Aston Villa to get smashed by 5 goals, Unai Emery, who prides himself mainly on a more pragmatic and more disciplined defensive approach, it was so uncharacteristic of Villa to be playing with such a high line constantly and not adapt and not learn, because Newcastle cut them open time and time again, and their finishing was devastating. Their finishing was absolutely devastating. But for whatever reason, Emery, who 9 times out of 10 would praise for thinking on his feet and for adapting as the game wears on, just didn't adapt to the high line and the high press of Newcastle that was seeing Villa not be able to cope with the ball at their feet, not be able to be comfortable with the ball at their feet. and ultimately continue to give the ball away time and time again, and ultimately not be able to cope with Newcastle's intensity and their tenacity throughout the entirety of the game. Hence why Newcastle went on to score 5 goals. Mistakes were aplenty in the game. Obviously, Tyrone Mings got injured early on in the game, and it looked a pretty bad one. So get well soon to him, and obviously, hopefully, he'll be back soon. But it did look a pretty serious injury, in all honesty. So, fingers crossed that he gets back to playing soon. But overall, very uncharacteristic of Aston Villa to play the way that they did and not even adapt to how Newcastle were playing. Is this maybe a sign of things to come for Villa? I highly doubt it. I think obviously they'll grow into the season more and more, and I think they will get better over time. And I think they'll obviously have plenty of things to look forward to this season, including, of course, a European run in the Europa Conference League. The positive for them, I guess, is Moussa Diaby looks pretty solid, and he looks like he's going to be a real handful for Premier League defenders. He took his goal very, very well, so I guess that's a positive. But otherwise, yeah, a lot of work to be done in terms of their defensive issues. But for Newcastle, brilliant start. Couldn't have asked for a more perfect start. Like I say, Isak's already off and running in terms of goals this season. Sandro Tonali looked pretty solid and looked like he is going to be absolutely loving life in that Newcastle midfield. Callum Wilson back among the goals as well, following on from his good season last campaign. Harvey Barnes hitting the ground running as well. All positives for Eddie Howe's side. And obviously a lot more to come from them as well in terms of the other players that they've got. Bruno Guimaraes had a bit of a quiet game in all honesty, but he was still pretty solid. But there's still more to come from him, more to come from Miguel Almiron, more to come from Joe Linton as well, Kieran Trippier. Their defensive side of the game in terms of obviously Botman and I forgot and Dan Burn and whoever else. And of course, there's still a couple of weeks left of the transfer window. And of course, with Newcastle, anything can happen there. So very interesting and exciting times ahead for Newcastle. We'll wait and see obviously how things go. But what a start for the Magpies. What a start for Eddie Howe's side. 5-1 against Aston Villa. A lot to work on if you're obviously Aston Villa yourselves. But for Newcastle, you're sitting pretty right now at the top of the league, and you'd be calling for the Premier League to finish the season here and now, wouldn't you? So we'll wait and see. But yeah, very interesting times ahead for Newcastle. Brentford 2, Tottenham 2. That's the next game of focus. Spurs obviously starting life under Ange Postecoglou, the first competitive game of Postecoglou's reign, and it got off to a perfect start, an absolute perfect start when Christian Romero headed home James Maddison's free kick. Now, I was saying before the ball had even kicked, before the season even kicked off, that I think Maddison will be a quality signing for Spurs, and instantly he proved right. He got 2 assists in the game, the 2 goals that obviously Tottenham scored. The first one, Romero couldn't miss, really. Fantastic delivery from a free kick by Maddison, and Romero couldn't really miss from close range with his header. Unfortunately for Romero, he'd obviously suffered a bit of a clash beforehand, and it was clearly affecting him, and maybe the header obviously enhanced maybe that head injury a little bit. So, of course, by taking precautions in obviously the concussion laws and everything, Tottenham substituted him. And, Brentford were pretty solid. Brentford played how Brentford normally played. They normally played on the counter-attack. They're pretty solid. They played some nice football at times to beat the Tottenham press. And obviously, they brought themselves back into the game. It was a pretty soft penalty to be given, in all honesty. It was a trip by Son. He makes contact with I think, was it Mbeumo? Was it Mbeumo who won the penalty as well as took it? I think it was Mbeumo. Either way, he made contact with the player, with the attacking player's foot, that caused him to trip and fall. It looked soft. It was soft. And when you compare it to obviously the penalty decision that didn't get given as a penalty in the Manchester United game that I was talking about earlier, yeah, you can kind of understand why Tottenham fans may feel a little bit annoyed by that alone, and the fact that that one wasn't given in the other game. So I think it was a penalty in certain ways. I can understand though if it wasn't given, but at the same time, it's one of those where if it goes for you, you want it. If it doesn't go in your favor, you're annoyed by it. And that's the sort of grey area that, of course, penalty decisions of this kind of nature and of this kind of scenario play out, and obviously have on them. So, yeah, interesting one, that one. But like I say, Brentford won the penalty. They got back into the game. Bryan Mbeumo scoring at the penalty, and then Brentford went 2-1 up. Vissa with the goal, bit of a fortunate goal. It took a deflection off debutant Mickey van der Ven to take it beyond the goalkeeping debutant of Vicario in the Tottenham goal, steered it past him, and Brentford were 2-1 up. A lot was mentioned about Ivan Toney. Of course, he's serving a ban from football. A lot of people were questioning whether Brentford could cope without Toney, and the answer pretty much is yes. I mean, even in the certain games that Toney missed last year, Vissa steps up and Mbeumo steps up. Those two are pretty dangerous, and they've got pretty decent backup. Of course, they're not to Toney's level, and I think Toney is a step above them two, or Vissa in particular, who seems to be more of his stand-in, shall we say. But I don't think I've seen Vissa play poorly, or I don't think I've ever seen Vissa not do something in a game that makes me think he is a very good stand-in or replacement for Ivan Toney. So I think these two are pretty much underrated as far as what Brentford go and are concerned in terms of the overall status of the Premier League. But very good. They both got on the score sheet. They hit the ground running for the season. To close out a first half, Emerson Royal absolutely smashed home to the bottom corner. Late on, of all people, Emerson Royal. Many people were questioning again, where are the goals going to come from for Spurs? Well, apparently they came from the defenders, Christian Romero to kick things off, and then Emerson Royal to equalise later on. It set things up for a very intriguing second half, and whilst I thought Spurs were the better side in the second half in terms of how much play they had, how much of the ball they had, Brentford, of course, still looked pretty dangerous on the counter-attack going forward, but the game kind of petered out from that point, and in the end, a point was probably the fair result, in all honesty. A slight game of two halves, I guess you could say, for the most part. And like I say, a point was probably a fair result. It's a solid point. Going away to Brentford and getting a point is a good point. Going away to Brentford is always going to be a tough and difficult challenge ahead. But Spurs, in their first game, saw it out well. No Harry Kane, of course. Richarlison leading the line. Admittedly, I did actually forget he was leading the line. He was actually on the pitch for about 80-odd minutes. But, he still was there. Son, not a great performance from him. But again, the hope there is that he will grow into the season and get back to the standards that he had set, obviously, of seasons gone by. I thought Basuma was excellent in the midfield for Spurs. Basuma, I thought, was brilliant in that midfield area for Spurs, and hopefully he can get back to his best. I thought Van der Ven had a solid debut. As far as what that goes, it was a pretty interesting game. It was a pretty exciting game, and I think, like I said, when I said at the beginning of the season. Like, I like watching Brentford play. I think Brentford play some nice football, and I think Brentford are going to be okay this season yet again. And I look forward to seeing Brentford, especially when they're at home. I think they are. I think they can play some excellent football, and I think they can play some nice, fluid football at times. And we saw that a little bit in the first half, more than the second half. But from a Spurs point of view, I said at the beginning of the season, I am going to be intrigued by Spurs this campaign because I feel like they're going to be exciting to watch. I feel like Spurs are going to be exciting to watch as a neutral because I think they're going to score plenty of goals. But I also think they're going to concede plenty of goals. And if this is anything to go by, a 2-2 draw, maybe that could come true as the season goes on. So very intrigued to watch Spurs this season. Always intrigued to watch Brentford. Both teams are going to be fine. Both teams are going to be comfortably mid-table-ish. We'll wait and see. We'll wait and see, obviously, what happens with these two teams going forward. But very intrigued to see both of them again in games to come. Brighton 4, Luton 1. Like we say, the Premier League new boys took a big hit and a dosage of reality and a knock back down to earth this weekend in terms of obviously their arrival in the Premier League. Brighton were incredible. Brighton cut Luton open time and time again and ultimately put them to the sword as well in a similar fashion to the way that Newcastle did with Villa. Brighton carved Luton open time and time again, and had it been for better finishing, maybe it could have been an even bigger scoreline in the Seagulls' favour. But just the 4 goals for Roberto De Zerbi's side. Solly March, João Pedro. I forgot the third goal scorer's name. Bear with me a second, because this is going to annoy me if I don't find out. It's going to annoy me. Top quality content, me trying to find out what this is. Right. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, there we go. Found it. So, yes. Solly March, João Pedro, Simon Adingra. I think that's how you pronounce it. Sorry if I completely butchered that name. Simon Adingra and Evan Ferguson all got goals for the Seagulls in what was a very comfortable win for De Zerbi's side. Colton Morris scored from the penalty spot for Luton to, of course, give them something to smile about on the day, seeing their side score their first Premier League goal, albeit from the penalty spot, of course, but a goal is still a goal. That made it 2-1, actually, so it could have actually gone on to be maybe a bit of a comeback and maybe a bit of a story, but ultimately Brighton regrouped and, of course, got the other 2 goals through Adingra and Ferguson to, of course, secure a very comfortable 3 points for the Seagulls. I worry for Luton. I do worry for Luton this season. Did they have enough about them to go on and make something of themselves? I think we'll know more about Luton when it comes to their home games. Like, obviously, against Brighton, it's always going to be a difficult task. We know how good Brighton were last season. We know how good Brighton have been since coming into the Premier League and how they've gone from strength to strength and continued to improve season upon season. We know how good De Zerbi's got them playing from last season. We knew it was going to be a difficult task for Luton to really really overcome this difficult task of Brighton. Brighton were very, very good, and it's going to be interesting to see how they go from strength to strength this season, and it's going to be interesting to see how they also cope with having Europa League football, obviously, on the horizon at the Amex Stadium as well as the season wears on, and we're also going to be interested to see how they obviously cope with obviously losing a couple of big-name players this summer in the forms of Alexis McAllister and, of course, Moises Caicedo. So far, so good. I think playing at home against a newly promoted side is obviously better than playing away from home against a newly promoted side on the opening day of the season. But Brighton handled it very, very well. For Luton, bit of a hard and rough sort of welcome to the Premier League sort of feel for them. Be interested to see, like I say, how they go. I'm interested to see when they play their first home game, which won't be next week. I think their first home game got postponed because their ground is obviously under renovation or something, and it's not going to be ready in time for the first home game. So they've actually asked to postpone it. Something along them lines anyway. So we'll wait and see on that one, how they do going forward. But yeah, a pretty rough welcome to the Premier League as far as what Luton are concerned. But for Brighton, fantastic result. Perfect way to start the season off. João Pedro, new signing, gets off on the score sheet. Youngster Evan Ferguson gets off to a great start for the season as well. Be interesting to see how his development continues this campaign. So yeah, a lot to look forward to if you are a Seagulls fan. Bournemouth 1, West Ham 1. Dominic Solanke rescuing a point for Bournemouth very late on after Jared Bowen had absolutely rocketed West Ham into the league. Quality goal from Jared Bowen. Good and well taken goal by Solanke to rescue a point. Didn't really watch this one of the 3 o'clock games, so obviously caught the highlights of this one. Obviously didn't watch all the games from start to finish this weekend. This one was just one of them that I didn't watch thoroughly. But from the highlights and everything, it did seem that West Ham had a few good opportunities, hit the post a couple of times. Like I say, I think overall this season, I do worry for Bournemouth. I think Bournemouth could be a team that may go down, and I put them to go down in my pre-season predictions. We'll wait and see on that one. For West Ham, I think they'll be safe. I think they've got the squad to obviously keep their heads above water. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to obviously watch them going forward. GTAG VR, hey dude, how are you doing? Welcome along to the stream, my guy. Thank you for coming along. Hope you are well. Would love to know who you support, my friend, and obviously if you have any thoughts or comments, opinions, predictions, feelings on anything to do with this past weekend's football, or of the Premier League variety, of course. Would love to hear from you. So hope you're well, my friend. But yeah, I worry about Bournemouth going forward. I think they will be a team to go down this season. West Ham, like I say, I think they've got a good enough team about them to keep their heads above water. I think they've got a European campaign coming up this season, which will be interesting for them to see. But yeah, I think overall, it's going to be an interesting season as far as what Bournemouth are concerned, but maybe for the wrong sort of reasons in terms of a battle for relegation. Sheffield United against Crystal Palace ended in a 1-0 victory for Crystal Palace. Sheffield United obviously being, again, the third of the new teams to have arrived in the Premier League following promotion from the Championship last season. Tough start. It was a game that could have gone either way. Palace weren't amazing. Sheffield United were pretty tough for the most part, but obviously in the end, Odsonne Edouard scoring the only goal of the game, the difference maker on the day for Palace. And he opens his account for the season. It's going to be interesting to see if obviously Palace can get a tune out of Edouard and be a consistent goal scorer going forward. I think that's something that Palace have lacked for season after season, has been a consistent enough goal scorer. I do feel like if they had a consistent enough goal scorer, I know Zaha's popped up with some goals, but let's face it, some of them have been from the penalty spot down the years. I feel like if they can get a consistent goal scorer, particularly a striker up front who is consistent and prolific, I feel like Palace maybe could start to look at maybe moving up the table a little bit more. But we'll have to wait and see, obviously, how that goes in particular, and whether or not that can be achieved by Palace and Roy Hodgson going forward. As far as what Sheffield United goes, I don't think many of their fans are being optimistic about the new season. And, given the way that they've conducted their business in the transfer window and the kind of squad they have, it will be a difficult ask for them to stay up this campaign. Losing your first home game, not a good indication of a good start at all. We'll wait and see, obviously, how they recover from this point forward. But yes, I do worry for Sheffield United, whilst Palace, I think, will be pretty much like Crystal Palace and pretty much like a team that is going to go about their business and be a middle-of-the-road kind of season. They'll stay up, they'll be comfortable, but whether or not they can find more goals, remain or are a consistent enough goal-scoring striker or not, remains to be seen. And if they can, could a Europa Conference League place be out of the question for Palace? I don't think it's a million miles away, to be honest. I wouldn't put it past them. I genuinely wouldn't. That's my kind of big take, I guess you could say, from this particular video. Everton, Fulham, last game on the agenda. Everton versus Fulham, a historic Premier League encounter, ended with Fulham winning 1-0. Everton, similar to Wolves, I think, can feel a little bit hard done by. Everton had plenty of chances but couldn't find the back of the net. And whether that was through hitting the post on a couple of occasions or by the goalkeeping ability of Bernd Leno in the Fulham goal, ultimately it thwarted Everton on multiple occasions. Everton can also feel a bit hard done by that Michael Keane's goal was ruled out for a foul on the goalkeeper Bernd Leno, despite obviously replay seemingly showing that Leno drops the ball after going over the top of an Everton striker. A very, very controversial moment in that game that ultimately cost Everton, because Bobby De Cordova-Reid went on to score and be the difference maker of the day for Fulham, winning Fulham the game, getting Fulham all 3 points to kick off the brand new season. I feel Everton could feel a bit hard done by, in all honesty. I feel like Everton probably were the better side. They had the better chances, but ultimately they couldn't find the back of the net. Is that going to be the story of Everton's season? Again, similar to how I said with Palace, they don't really have a consistent enough goal scorer, and they want Dominic Calvert-Lewin to come back ASAP to obviously give them a real opportunity of maybe finding that striker that's going to steer them clear of relegation this season. I think Everton will be safe. I think there are 3 worse teams than Everton this season, so I would back them to being safe, but it's going to be about whether they can find goals or not. And to be fair, Sean Dyche's side, they created a few good chances. I don't think Fulham were at their best. I know Fulham hit the post as well in this game and were pretty unfortunate not to have scored a goal earlier than what they did. But at the same time, it wasn't entirely convincing from a defensive point of view against an Everton side who, like I say, struggled to score goals. So maybe it's just a beginning of the season thing. We'll wait and see. But I'm backing Everton to be safe and sound as the season wears on. Fulham will obviously be safe. I don't think they'll have as good of a campaign as what they did last season when they first came back to the Premier League. But I see them being safe and sound. So we'll wait and see, obviously, how things go from this point onwards. But yeah, both teams should be safe as the season wears on. And that's it. That is all of the games from this past weekend all rounded up. Can't wait for the next round of Premier League fixtures to obviously hit this coming weekend. Look out for a Premier League predictions video on that one, where I'll be talking about all the games to come up in obviously in the next round of Premier League fixtures. We'll be talking about them and giving predictions on all of them. Other content come up. We'll be talking more transfers. We'll be talking more about the season ahead, that kind of thing on certain teams. So do look out for any kind of videos and stuff like that. Hit the like button if you haven't already on this video, would be very much greatly appreciated. Also subscribe if you are new. Both things will always and be greatly appreciated as well. As I always say, these are just the thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, feelings, whatever you want to call it, of this guy. I want to know what you guys think. What do you make of any of the games that took place this past weekend? What do you make of any of the goals, any of the scenarios that played out? Do you think some teams were hard done by? Do you think some decisions were wrong, were right? Do you think some games were poor, were great, were excellent? What are your own thoughts, your comments, opinions, predictions, feelings on any of the games that took place this past weekend in the opening round of a brand new Premier League season? Would love to hear from you all in the comment section, in the chat, whatever it may be. Otherwise, like I say, hit the like button on the way if you haven't already. Subscribe if you're new or want to see more content like this. Both things are always incredibly greatly appreciated. And of course, as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening. I've been Fletch. This has been a Premier League Aftermath video. Glad that these are back. Glad that we're going to be talking about these again going forward and reviewing all of the weekend's action. I'm going to try and do this on either the Monday or the Tuesday, depending on obviously when on how the Premier League lays it out. So if it's going to be if the final game of a weekend is going to be on a Sunday, I'll do it on a Monday. If the final Premier League game is going to be on a Monday, I'll do it on a Tuesday. And obviously, depending on if there's any midweek clashes as well, we'll obviously do that on a Friday night or something, or a Thursday night, depending on obviously how the Premier League lines up its fixtures and everything. So we'll wait and see on all of that, which will make for great and interesting stuff. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. I've been Fletch. This has been another Premier League Aftermath video. I'll see you all again soon in another video or live stream or whatever it may be. Cheers, guys. Have a good day. See you soon.